Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Sherlock, BBC Sherlock episode review. This one's going to be for Season 4, Episode 1, the Six Thatchers. This is going to be a full spoiler review, so just be aware of that if you haven't seen the episode. I'm going to be talking about the events of this episode in detail. But let's get straight into the review. Overall, I thought this was an okay episode. I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was particularly strong in a lot of ways either. I think what I liked about the episode a lot was, I think, the core of the Mary story. I actually liked that a lot because I feel it kind of helped to kind of complete her story and kind of more explain what, I think reflecting on it, felt a little bit random in like the finale of Season 3 about the reveal that she's this kind of super spy, agent, assassin. This, I felt, brought it together a lot and really kind of helped me kind of get behind the character a lot more. I'd never hated Mary or felt like that she got in the way of what the show was about when she was introduced. I just always felt like I never made the same connection with her as I had with like Sherlock, John, and some of the other characters. But this one, I think, really helped to actually make her part of the cast, and so this episode being the episode where they kill her off, it was actually really impactful by the end how they did it in terms of her as a character herself and revealing all that stuff about her past, and how the theme of the episode was about you never being able to kind of run away from like your destiny, your past, that it's always going to catch up with you. That was a really good theme to have for this episode, and how it kind of linked into, in a way, to all of the characters, that they have these flaws that they can't quite get away from, no matter how good we think they are or should be at this point in time. And you know, for her to have that kind of darker past, being this kind of you know, slightly immoral assassin, just being out for pay, doing whoever pays the highest, coming back to haunt her here with this, you know, Agra mission, and then one of them being revealed to be alive, and having this information about her being the one who did it and the mastermind behind it all. It came together like okay. The only problem is that I think this episode was kind of very messy in how it was written, and so how they sort of presented her story to us was a bit all over the place. But I think the core of what is actually there, what you take away from this episode about Mary, was actually well done. In that by the end, you know, the fact that she was constantly talking to John about how, you know, I don't deserve you, you are the kind of perfect partner, and like, I made all these mistakes, but you were always there for me, and I'm so happy that I was able to have this kind of life with you, and that my life as Mary is the kind of one I'll remember, not the spy stuff or any of these other personas that she's had. It's this life with John and Rosie that you will remember, and how ultimately the reveal with John kind of adds this other layer to it that is tragic and saddening to see, but it's going to be interesting to see how they approach doing that, and I'll address the John situation a bit more later on. But while we're still talking about Mary, how they actually did her death scene, I suppose, is interesting, in that I think when I first watched it, I interpreted it one way, but I think now I kind of get what they were going for. My first thoughts on it were that, like, is Sherlock purposefully antagonizing Vivian to have her turn the gun on him to save Mary, who she was initially pointing the gun at? And Mary saw that and dived in front of it, seeing what Sherlock was doing. But in fact, the way I think it's actually meant to come across is that this is just Sherlock giving into his kind of flaw, in a way, that he sees a deduction, he sees this stuff, but can't see that it's going to set her off. He just has to keep insulting her and analyzing her, and he gets the gun turned on him, that he turned what was a standoff into a, for sure she is going to shoot someone. And then Mary acted to save Sherlock. She made that choice in the end to save Sherlock and sacrifice herself. And I liked how they did it, because she obviously afterwards, you know, John comes in and she apologizes to Sherlock for shooting him, which I think they did need to have happen. And you have the final moment with John, and then she dies. But after, as I explained, the key moment where she talks about how, you know, the Mary Watson persona is the one that she'll always remember, and she's so happy to have that life. And I think the thing with John's anger, and I'll get into explaining a little bit more, but the Mary side of this is that he hasn't accepted, I think, yet, because he arrived a little late, he hasn't accepted the fact that Mary chose to step in front of the bullet for Sherlock. She made that decision to, you know, potentially have herself die to save Sherlock. And I think John, however, he comes to realize that that's what happened, and that Mary's choice is very important in this situation. That could actually change the way John sees things. Now, obviously, with Sherlock, this situation is very interesting in that, as much as maybe, you know, a lot of people are criticizing John after this episode, I think it's important to criticize Sherlock as well for what he did here, in that, as I said, he turned a situation that was obviously pretty hard to get out of, and that she was pointing a gun at them, and we didn't know if she was going to fire or not, but he basically made it so that that gun was going to fire. And in that sense, he is somewhat, maybe not completely, but somewhat responsible for someone dying in this situation, and that happened to be Mary. Now, admittedly, she made the choice, she jumped into the bullet, he would have been the one to get hit otherwise. So, in a way, like, he didn't break his vow in the sense of, like, he just let her die. It just, she made a decision that kind of jumped over his vow. And so in that sense, you know, John telling, you know, Sherlock, you broke this vow, is not really the fairest thing to do, but Sherlock is still somewhat responsible for what happened. Even if he didn't necessarily purposefully lead to her death, he, you know, made some of it happen in a way. And it's an interesting dynamic, of course, because he made this vow and was trying so hard to make it happen, but fundamentally the thing with Sherlock that comes out is basically that the people around him are always in danger. Because villains tend to target Sherlock, the people around Sherlock come into danger as well. And so at the end, when we find out that John has basically set it up so that Sherlock is not allowed to be anywhere near Rosie, even though he's her godfather, it's actually understandable. Even though you kind of dislike John at that moment, you understand why he's so protective of his daughter, in that chaos surrounds Sherlock, and there's always danger around him. So him separating ties with Sherlock at this point in time for the safety of Rosie, given what just happened to Mary, you could say, you know, obviously he has a lot to deal with himself, and there's a lot of explanation to come from John's side, but that decision as like a father makes sense, I think, even though it's unfair to blame everything on Sherlock like John actually did. But still, it was an interesting way to take Sherlock, who I think otherwise in this episode demonstrated that he has grown, in that I think he's demonstrated this episode that he's much more kind of understanding of, like, kind of emotions and kind of caring for people, as shown when at the end he's the one who goes to see the therapist, and admittedly he's not used to that sort of interaction, and that usually it's John who's the one that we expect to go here, but this time it's Sherlock, because he just doesn't know what way to kind of handle John at this point in time. The other thing is obviously the message that Mary leaves behind. One question I think we need to get the answer to is, when exactly did she record this? Like, prior to what, like, reveal happening did she actually record this? The other thing is that I think we have to assume that Mary knew about John's quote-unquote cheating, and that would inform why she thinks that John needs to be saved from whatever hell or whatever like that he's in. I definitely interpret that after the credits scene as not Mary saying, like, she hated Sherlock, like, just telling him go to hell. I think it's like literally go to, like, a codename place, hell, which is like the current mind space of John. Like, you will need to go to, like, dark places to get to John and kind of snap him out of whatever he's in after this, because obviously I suppose her perspective on it, recording that message, is that she gave John the opportunity to come out and tell her what happened with this other woman, and he didn't take those opportunities. So for whatever reason, I think she is accepting the fact that he didn't tell her, and so if she died prior to him being able to tell her the truth about what happened, he would snap in this way that he actually did, and that he would blame Sherlock to some extent for breaking the vow, and he would be in this space to where he needs something to snap him out of this situation that he's in. It's it's definitely interesting that it highlights, one, that like Mary was aware that this was going to happen to some degree, that she accepted the fact after all these things coming up with obviously the season 3 finale, and then whatever timing within this episode that she recorded that video, the 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 other three, agents coming back up as well, that she was never going to ever get away with that her past was always going to come back to haunt her. So she left this message to kind of save John, and in that she couldn't be saved, I suppose, was her idea with this. And it's interesting that, like, obviously it highlights the kind of friendship between Sherlock and Mary, that she trusts him enough to do this, that she's aware that this is going to be a very important, probably one of the hardest kind of missions Sherlock has ever put on, trying to get John back from this place, and that they're almost putting John into this position as, like, I almost assume that the final episode of this season is going to kind of be John is the villain, maybe not in the same way as like the other villains, but like John is the one who is in that mindset where he's going to be opposing Sherlock, and it's going to be Sherlock getting John back. And that's an interesting spot to put John in. As I said, I'll focus on the John side of the story a little bit more in a minute, but just still talking about the Mary request. It's definitely interesting that this kind of happened. I think it's one of the good kind of setup moments from the episode, in that if they just left it with Mary died, it's just Sherlock dealing with this, and then John is not letting Sherlock in. This actually adds something to it, in that it's like, okay, the final moment for Mary, and she's kind of setting Sherlock on this path to help John. Really interesting. The other thing, I suppose, let's talk about John at this point. I think the first thing to say about this is just that with this show, we know there is always kind of, to some degree, more than meets the eye. And this was in an episode that had so much to it, that was quite blunt, almost to a fault with the writing. They went fairly vague on this John is cheating plot, in the sense of, like, these two characters in person said about 5 words to each other, and then sent a few texts to each other. Now, to some degree, John feels the need to tell Mary about this, and that he's about to admit whatever happened between them happened to her. We don't know the extent to which whatever happened between them, but obviously, at the very least, it is implying that just the thought of maybe doing something with this other woman, or that he actually did something with this woman, is what we're meant to take out of this. That he broke his wedding vows, just like he is blaming Sherlock for breaking his vow to protect the family. And that is part of why, when Mary dies, I think he is blaming it all on Sherlock. That he is, at this point in time, for whatever reason, unwilling to tackle his own feelings about what he did, his own guilt about not revealing this to Mary prior to her death, and he's putting it all on Sherlock, because Sherlock blames himself in a way for what happened. And it's obviously unfair that he's blaming Sherlock, but at the same time, this is a case of the danger around Sherlock has led to the death of one of John's family members, and it's very impactful. That usually John is okay with the danger, and he's experienced some loss before, in that, as far as he was aware, for so long Sherlock was dead, but he came back. This is the first time where someone just flat out is dead. That he was there, he's a doctor, he checked her pulse, she died in his arms, and that is a huge moment for just it to be fully confirmed exactly in that moment, that she died, Sherlock was there, and I suppose to some degree he realized what happened, that Sherlock probably pressed too hard and caused this to happen, and that's why he blames him so much for it. Now, it's definitely going to be a case of, like, in the coming episodes, I assume Sherlock is going to try to get back into a relationship with John. Sherlock is going to try and get back into some sort of a friendship with John. He's going to push away, and it's going to be about how far basically John basically has Sherlock go for him before he finally lets him back in, before he finally is kind of, I suppose, truthful about his feelings about what exactly went on, in that whatever sense of betrayal he has for what he did to Mary after she was so honest to him and he just wouldn't reveal this to her. How's that going to actually play out? I think that's the one, I suppose, positive thing going forward, is that in terms of the writing, they have set up an interesting situation for our two main characters of John and Sherlock, in that they are going to have to deal with a lot here. There's a lot of, guilt, betrayal, issues now presented between these two characters who their friendship has been like so important to what this series is, and now all of a sudden there's a massive rift between the two of them. How do they approach doing that? And as I said, they look like they're introducing the villain of this season in the next episode, which I assume they'll probably wrap him up within that episode and maybe not have him go into the third episode, which would lead the third episode to kind of potentially be a more character-focused thing about Sherlock and John, which I think could be amazing. Based on the setup from here and whatever they do in the next episode, having a kind of Sherlock and John fight issue, finally this big emotional scene between the two of them where they resolve their issues and come back together as friends, or whatever they do, could be really well done. But again, it all depends on how they write John going forward. I think most importantly, how they go about fully establishing what exactly happened with this woman, because I think, again, the way they presented it was so vague that I'm kind of struggling to just accept it as super simple. He cheated on Mary and this is how they chose to show it. I think there's more to this in some ways, in that maybe he really didn't do anything serious with her, but just the fact that he considered it, given that his life was so good at that point, the fact that he even considered it after all Mary's kind of done to kind of prove herself to be truthful with John, reveal all this stuff, and he couldn't do that, is just this kind of complete betrayal that he feels with regards to that relationship. Now, I think the one thing that I've seen in reaction to the whole John situation in this episode is a lot of overreaction to it, in the sense of people kind of disowning the character completely, which to some extent I understand, in that it's a disappointing direction to see them go in with the character from a writing perspective, but it just feels a little bit like, wow, are we really not allowing our characters to have flaws without just completely disowning them? Can we really not have these sort of arcs where their characters deal with issues that they have, problems that they dealt with, mistakes that they made, in that are we just going to accept that Sherlock is or was a drug addict, that he's done all this stuff where he puts people around him at danger because of basically because he courts combat with these villainous masterminds, which creates danger around him, that because that blame him to some extent for what happened to Mary, and all of this other stuff, what he did to John in terms of the fake death and stuff like that. Are we okay with what Sherlock did to those characters? Are we okay with the fact that Mary lied to John initially, still didn't tell him the full truth, and then another lie had to come out, and then her plan to basically run away, change her identity a bunch of times, stay away, and then maybe at some point in the future come back to the family, just leaving a letter and not properly saying goodbye? Are we going to accept these kind of flawed moves from other characters, but just completely vilify John, that he made the worst decision of all, so he is hated from here on out just because of that, given the vague setup of the whole cheating plot? I think, yes, it is a very kind of flawed thing for him to do, but I think it's one of those ones where I see this more as a potential for character development, more so than a I hate John from here on out thing, in the same way that I saw the Sherlock is a drug addict thing, and so on. That you giving characters a flaw is a way to create a character arc for them. So I'm definitely on the perspective of a kind of like a wait and see approach to this John plot. If they just flat out commit to it and that look, he cheated and that's all there is to it, then maybe that's the time for me to have my kind of outraged moment with the character. But right now, not having the full story and knowing what this show actually is with regards to its ability to explain later on that there is more to certain scenes than meets the eye is definitely something that I don't want to kind of commit to right now, just hating John, because I think there is a potential for a fascinating plot going forward from here. As I said, focusing on John and Sherlock, which hasn't necessarily been the case with the show up to now, because like basically the last 2 episodes, not including the special, The Abominable Bride, but the last 2 episodes have been very, very Mary focused, and kind of John outside of his relationship with Mary has sort of taken a back seat. Like even in this episode, John is not really a focus in this episode at all. This is a Mary and Sherlock episode primarily, and I don't have a problem with that because, as I said, I liked the Mary stuff within the episode, but John very much felt like a backseat character in this episode, in that if you didn't have the whole cheating plot to John in this episode, he is purely there just to set up some jokes for Sherlock and then react to Mary's death at the end. And I kind of think maybe the writers noticed that and felt like they had to put something in for John. But either way, the setup from here is that now all of a sudden where they go with John is probably one of the most interesting aspects of the show, which, yes, you can question how they went about doing that, but now suddenly making him important again is actually quite interesting. Talking about the rest of the episode, I suppose, I liked the case at the start, prior to the bigger mystery of like what the 6 Margaret Thatcher statues mean. The first one and adding an extra case onto that one I thought was actually really interesting. The boy kind of having a seizure or suffocating in behind the fake seat, trying to pull like I've returned home earlier than expected prank on his parents. That was fascinating. I liked the deduction on that, but it kind of highlighted like that would have been really cool to have like maybe more time on, whereas it felt like Sherlock walked into the room, solved the mystery, stalled for a bit of time, and then explained exactly what happened. It feels like the writers are super struggling to create a mystery based around a deduction that consists of like, that makes up like most of the episode anymore. That they can't do that anymore. That the likes of Scandal in Belgravia, the Study in Pink, those type of things, that they can't do that anymore. That they seem to now rely on big dramatic moments with the characters, and Sherlock's life is in danger here, John's life is in danger here, Mary's life is in danger here, big reveal about Mary, Sherlock's faking his death. They seem to rely on those big moments with the characters more so than the strength of the deductions, the cases, the mysteries at this point in time. And that's disappointing, because it really feels like the show has kind of lost sight of what it was in some of the episodes that are most well received by the fans, like 201, like 101, 103, 201, 203, and you know, season 3 is a little bit mixed all over the place, so I'm not exactly sure how everyone reacts to those episodes, but some aspects of those episodes are considered to be very good. And it feels like this season right now has kind of lost sight of that a little bit, but I have hope that they'll try and figure out something as we go forward. The reveal about the whole Tbilisi incident was interesting. The reveal at the end that it's actually Vivian, the kind of secretary of the group that was the one behind it all, was like, okay, that's interesting, but it very much felt like we can't write a really complicated explanation that Sherlock can deduce, so we'll just have a huge plot twist happen to make it happen instead. That's what it felt like to me, in that it was fine, and they made it kind of character interesting somehow, but it felt like we can't write the complex stuff anymore, so let's just do a twist and have some crazy explanation about how the twist makes sense. So there are problems with the episode, I think, but there are some pretty good aspects to it as well. I like the explanation about the four super agents, and they all had the memory drives. That's how they kind of were such a good unit, and the kind of leaked information that led to people suspecting like Mary maybe betrayed them, and that's why AJ was kind of such a villain in the episode. But I suppose coming to the end here, overall I enjoyed the episode, but it wasn't amazing. So that's it. So yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.